were plotting on the day of inauguration to make Mr. Obama a one-term president. So need I say more that every time we as blacks prove that we can produce, we can excel, is then that this brutal, reactionary force turn loose in this nation. So that our challenge is continue to make them out of alive and move forward even with this task force and really know the spirit of what we've heard this day about law enforcement and criminal justice. It was all about stopping our progress, and they denied us equality of opportunity to rationalize or justify their evil deeds. Finally, regarding our venue for our next meeting at Third Baptist, we do have the means put in operation, virtual meeting. And I think to be consistent and be fair, my suggestion would be that we'll give people the opportunity to present through live stream. And this will be a historic day too, on the 13th in particular, because it was on April the 13th, 1858, that unfortunately blacks in San Francisco felt so unwelcome, so disenfranchised, so ostracized, that they met at First AME Zion Church. And the Baker family, who were abolitionists, and the Brodericks, who were abolitionists, and Starr King of First Unitarian Church, together to hear the invitation from Governor Douglas of Victoria, British Columbia. Victoria Island is the place that he invited blacks to come to. But he said, get aboard the ship, the Commodore, come up to Canada, and they won't respect you in San Francisco. They won't give you justice there. And those blacks established their community, 1858. And then Dr. W.B. Du Bois celebrated his 90th birthday at Third Baptist and spoke to a capacity audience. Not all black, well integrated. We had many allies then too. And he spoke about the evils of capitalism and how if we did not change our trajectory and our course, our nation, this democratic republic, be in trouble. And he predicted that before he left this nation and settled in Accra, Ghana, West Africa. So we will have all things in order for you. And we know how to be excellent hosts and hostess at the historic Third Baptist Church.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown, and thank you for hosting what will be the first in-person task force meeting for this historic effort. Very timely, and thank you for educating us about the importance of the date. So I guess we'll go back to Attorney Brown so that he can maybe address Senator Bradford's question, but then also after you address that question, can you inform us if the task force will be live streamed so that like for folks who are just the public, right, who aren't testifying in any way, like would they be able to watch it like they've been doing?
Right. So I did want to clarify that as being a different issue from the access to witnesses who might be in remote locations. We will continue to live stream the meetings so that the public can participate and observe the meetings through online means. That is different than having the Blue Jeans platform set up, which we have been operating under, where the entire meeting has been remote. That process is no longer going to be in effect due to the expiration of the governor's executive order. To Senator Bradford's point, in terms of taking testimony remotely, as the legislature has been doing, one of the things that we will look into, because I believe that the legislature may operate under different rules than we do as an advisory board, but we will also look into the capabilities that may be available to us to see about an operator assisted line, which would be different from just having a conference call line. It would have to be managed. We have to look into the resources and the availability and capabilities of whether we can do that, but we certainly will explore it and we'll look into it. Obviously, the objective is to be over-inclusive in terms of participation, and we will do everything that we can within the confines of the rules and the technological capabilities to do that, and we will advise the task force accordingly.
I have another clarifying question. So in terms of public comment, we've been having it for an hour in the beginning of our agenda. So in order to make public comment as it stands, you have to be there in person, right or no?
So that again is part of the issue that we're exploring with the executive order that's currently in place. Public comment has been allowed by virtual means, whether it's by teleconference or over some of these online platforms where public meetings are being held. So we have to examine what the expiration of that order implies for the access to continue to do public comments virtually by telephonic means. Again, I need to look at whether the order is restrictive in the sense that it would restrict us from doing so, or whether it's permissive in the sense that, notwithstanding the expiration of the order, bodies can make the decision to continue to take comments in that manner. And so again, this is the first time that we'll be meeting outside of these orders, which expire on the 31st of March. And so we will look into all options and provide that back to the task force.
Senator Bradford, did you have any comments?
I was just saying the executive order shouldn't supersede the fact that providing a not in our phone line where folks can still provide their testimony. I mean, we've done it when I was on local elected official. We've done it in the legislature and done it on various other, organizations I've been part of. I think public engagement is critical, and I think Vice Chair Brown says they have the means and the facilities to help make that happen. So I think we should take advantage of that.
And I certainly don't disagree with Senator Bradford. I just don't want to misspeak, currently not having fully looked into the issue, but once I can make sure that everything is confirmed, I'll again report all of the available options.
Okay. So now that we have that kind of figured out, I am going to share my screen again for the agenda. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Also to ask if any task force members, and it's okay if not today because it's been a very long day, but if task force members have any potential witnesses they have in mind for these particular panels in the event that we adopt this agenda, to make that known. So again, the first day is around education disparities in institutions, where we're going to have a series of panels, pre-K to 12th grade, then college to professional education, and then school to prison pipeline, with some updates around community engagement and the subpoena power. And then on April 14th, we're going to have a final discussion and vote on report 1, and then hearing from the communications firms about potential communication strategies, and then continuing the conversation around the scope of work for the economic consultants, and then some other business in terms of future meetings. So I think before I entertain a motion to adopt this agenda, I wanted to go back and talk a bit about the community engagement plan, because I made my concerns kind of known. We received a few emails as well, making their concerns known, and then also there's some public comment about the communications firms in the Bunche Center, and their lack of deliverables. And so just wanted to have an open conversation amongst all of us as a task force. I'll make my kind of position clear. I think that we should think about revisiting the contract between the DOJ and the Bunche Center, and by virtue the communication firms. And so what that revisiting could look like, I think, is, yesterday we made national news with this effort, and so there's a lot of interest, I think, now. And so for the April meeting, I was even thinking we allow for the Bunche Center and the communications firms to present, what they have in mind, despite kind of their lack of, achieving deliverables thus far. But then we also, and I think this is what Vice Chair Brown was alluding to in the very beginning of this process, between now and the next meeting, we publicize openly the opportunity for other people and other entities or communications firms to present to us their ideas on how to educate the California public on our findings, and to also present to us their ideas for a communication strategy. And then we can decide amongst ourselves in that April meeting, do we continue with the contract with the Bunche Center and the 2 communication firms that we've already recruited and listed, or do we decide to go with someone else or some other entity? That's something that I'm proposing, but obviously I'm not the dictator of this task force. I want, us to have a conversation about it. And if most task force members just think, let's just stick with who we have, then that's fine too. But I just wanted to open that discussion and see if anyone had any thoughts on that. Senator Bradford, you're recognized.
Well, without first seeing the contract, I'm unaware where they've fallen short or what's lacking there, but I do agree our outreach has to be better than what it's been. I'm bombarded every time I go home in the streets about task force and what are you guys are doing. And I was telling people all last weekend, I said, hey, we're meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday online. Make sure go to my office, call my office. We'll get you the link so you can watch it and you can monitor it. People are not being notified of what it is that we're doing. We had a public relations firm. I used to be in marketing, and I have plenty of friends who are in marketing, and this is an easy sale, folks. People want to know what we're doing, and I'm encountered all the time in the community. They're not being contacted. So, like I said, I don't know what the contract speaks to, but I think we can improve. So I'm going to come from that standpoint that I think we're lacking in real public relations and promoting that which we're doing on this task force and getting even broader community engagement and input as well. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Senator Bradford.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you. Members of the task force, Madam Chair, from where I sit and look, the communications team ought to know from Jump Street that our black media, the Black Association of Publishers and Newspaper Owners, should be contacted. Our black pop stations should be contacted. And definitely the great communication system of the black community, the black church. It's a no-brainer. This communication should not have been compromised. So we in the driver's seat, we have to tell them what we want to be done and without delay. And if they can't fulfill it, we need to have positive conversations session with them and look at making a change. So having said that, I would make a motion that we would, if it's in order now, that we approve the agenda for the next meeting, and then we will go to have a discussion on this communication contract.
Okay.
I'll second that motion for the agenda if it's appropriate right at this point.
Okay, so it has been properly moved and seconded to adopt the draft April agenda. Is there any discussion on the matter?
Yes.
Parliamentarian Johnson needs to go on mute.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sawyer.
So I agree with both
Not yet.
Mr. Bradford and Reverend Brown that we need to give instructions exactly what we want to the communication firm. Look at and give everybody here an opportunity to look at to make sure we gave them proper instructions from the gate. And if we need to add to it, then we need to do that. Again, the second part of that is, as Reverend Brown said, if they're not fulfilling what we want in a relatively short period of time, if they can't do that, communicate with the black media, the churches, the black organizations that we know, then we know we need to make a change, that they may not have the capacity or the ability to do it. So we need to come together, reaffirm what we want, give them a timeline to get it done. And if they don't, then we as a group then need to seriously move on. But the good part about that is we'll know what we want, exactly what was missing that they didn't do, so that whenever we interview, whomever we interview, whether it's a PR firm or a communication firm, we'll know exactly what outcomes we want. And so there's no confusion with that. So I'll second the motion if there wasn't one for Mr. Bradford.
There was a second already, and we're in the discussion period. So, Member Gross, you're recognized.
So I'm really, I don't know what the word is I'm actually looking for, Chair Moore, but your process is confusing to me. If your intent was really to try to get clarity on and to get more information about what the communications firms were doing, why could you not reach out to me, to the Bunch Center, to the communications firms? You were in a meeting just last week with Attorney Mary Lee, who organizes and convenes actually the meetings of the Anchor Orgs. I asked her, You didn't raise any concerns. And so then you bring it out in a public forum. You cast a potentially negative light on the communications firms and the Bunch Center. And that just feels very unfair to me. So I just wanted to say, from a process perspective, this is very, very troubling to me, how you are operating. And again, we already have agendized that the communications firms are going to present in the April meeting. We decided that in February.
Then we're good.
And so why now all of the extra concern, short of, yes, there's going to be, there has been, and we knew there was going to be greater visibility to what's happening in this task force. But again, your process, to me, feels very odd, and it makes me wonder, what is the real intent here?
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Just Madam Chair, I've had my hand up. I'm happy to let Vice Chair go, but I just want to let you know I have something to
Oh,
say.
sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, so after
Madam
Vice Chair Brown, yes, go ahead. Mhm.
Madam Chair, everybody. From where I said again, there's no personal attack on anyone. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. It is a fact that around this state, for our last two meetings in particular that I know about, there has not been optimum communication. And that shouldn't have taken a whole lot of time. All they needed to do was to contact these agencies that I mentioned. But there was no contact. And I can speak right at home, there in San Francisco. The Sun Reporter and the Post had not heard from any communications company representing this task force regarding our scheduled meetings and the pertinent information about what was going on. And so that's a fact. So all we need to do is realize that one room is never improved. Filled, that's room for improvement. But still, if it's not heard what we are sharing here, then we have to do the right thing for the good of the cause. But we can give them opportunity, but they need to prove themselves going forward.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brown. Member Montgomery Step.
Thank you, Chair Moore. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about the communications item in plan. I'm fine with the agenda. So, and I also want to hear from the two firms next month. So I think that's appropriate. But in our last meeting, toward the end, I believe, we discussed kind of what a general protocol would be when we get certain media requests and the like. And so we all, are going to represent ourselves at some point, but we also had a discussion about at least getting in touch with one of the firms as we receive certain inquiries if we are representing the task force. So my staff did that, and it's been 30 days and we hadn't heard anything. And so I think that may have been something that wasn't communicated to the firm, but that is also just another area where myself, I've experienced not any communication with regard to our last conversation in the last meeting. I also, months ago when this came up, I asked to see a contract and was directed to a state website. So at this time, I would like to just request that I can see that contract, because the contract generally has a scope of work. And so, yes, if we're not communicating things we want, that's understandable. Coming as a task force, we need to do that. But there are also things that have already been contracted out And so I would just like to see before the next meeting to compare that with what the firm presents to us, because those are two different things. We can ask for additional services, but there's already a scope of work. Well, there should be if there's a contract. So I just wanted to put those things on the record, and certainly not to disparage anyone. I'm sure everyone. The Bunch Center has a wonderful reputation. Sure, the firms are great, but just with respect to this, I haven't received what I needed and what we've discussed as task force members already. So I'm looking forward to that conversation next month. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I address what Member Montgomery Steppe requested, just briefly?
Yes, sorry that my microphone. Go ahead, Attorney.
No problem. Member Montgomery Steppe, the contract, you were probably directed to the website because it's a public document, but we can make it easy for everybody and just send the entire task force a copy of the contract. As you probably know, and I know as the legislators know, the state contracting process is an entire process that's very involved. And so to the extent that task force members do have concerns, once you've reviewed the contract and based on your experiences thus far, that there are concerns about that, then you can communicate that obviously to Dr. Grills, as she's the liaison from the task force to the Bunch Center, also to us, and then we can try to work cooperatively to address some of those concerns.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else like to add to the discussion? I think, oh, was there someone? Mm-hmm. So I guess to address Member Grill's comments, I completely hear you. And I just want to say, rest assured that, although I didn't contact you directly, I did contact the DOJ, who then instructed me that I can contact the Bunch Center and the two communication firms directly. And that is what I did. So I have access to the contract, and I don't mind sharing my screen, but I don't think we need to do that at this time. But when I read through the contract between the DOJ and the Bunch Center, I saw that they had missed two deliverables in the contract. January 31st date, which was about logistical support for the anchor organizations and providing information to the anchor organizations about the logistical support the Bunch Center is supposed to provide by virtue of the contract. But then they also missed the February 28th deliverable, which was the creation of the website that will host information about the listening sessions. Also, the contract mandated for the Bunch Center to meet with the anchor organizations at least 2 times a month. Anchor orgs have reached out to me with their concerns because they have not met 2 times a month. In fact, this month they didn't meet at all. And in April, they only have 1 meeting scheduled, and that's on April 12th. So those are just some of the few things. Also, in terms of, and I said this yesterday, in terms of the logistical support, in the contract, it is budgeted, I think it's $52,000 that the Bunch Center is supposed to provide the anchor orgs to support their listening sessions, whether that's with the recording equipment, a technician, and other things. But again, anchor orgs have reached out to me with their concerns and said they thought, because the Bunch Center has not communicated this to them, they thought that they had to use their stipend to secure a recording equipment, technicians, and location costs. But when I read the contract, it clearly shows that it's the Bunch Center who's supposed to provide that on behalf of the anchor orgs. The anchor orgs are not supposed to dip into their stipend for that type of support. Right, so those are like 4 major things between the contract that I read between the DOJ and the Bunch Center. Those 2 deliverables that have been missed, January 31st and 2/28, the fact they haven't communicated to the anchor org that they're supposed to provide logistical support to them. And in fact, not all the anchor orgs have received their stipend, so many of the anchor orgs are using their own money to secure recording equipment and locations for their planned hearings. And then again, they're not meeting 2 times a month, and that's super important. Like, you have to, these anchor orgs who don't really have any ties to each other before this process, you have to meet consistently in order to make this process really, really work. It has to be a collaborative effort. And if you're not meeting 2 times a month as required by the contract, you're barely even meeting once a month, I don't see where the progress will come in.
So
And
this is why I wished you had actually called me, reached out, laid out your concerns, and so then, clarification could be provided. So, for example, and I'm not going to do a go back and forth with you, it's 5:34, but I will say this notion about meeting twice a month with the Bunch Center. The ankle orgs were being protected from having to have too many group meetings so that the actual work that needs to be done could get done. So while they have a group meeting during the month, the ankle orgs there was outreach to them multiple times from the professional facilitator who's working on behalf of the Bunch Center. And she did one-on-one meetings with those organizations. So I think that we needed to have laid everything out, gotten clarification, and then where things were falling short, note that things are falling short and what's the corrective action plan, and where things are misunderstood, clarify that and move forward. So I think process is important, and that I wished you had reached out and laid these things out in a way that allowed people to coherently, cogently, effectively communicate back to you and the rest of the task force, who now have all of these concerns and, well, not concerns perhaps, but questions in their mind around things for which there actually is no there there. And in terms of the website, it may have been delayed. I don't know. I was out of the country. However, the website is up now. There is a link on the Bunch Center, and they're still building that platform. So again, you're leaving an impression that may not, in fact, match with reality, and that to me is problematic.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move on and just quickly, for the record, note my concerns about the communications firm. So earlier I addressed my concerns with the Bunch Center, but now I'm about to address my concerns with the communications firms. So like Member Montgomery stated at our last hearing, we said that the DOJ would relinquish their responsibility in terms of press inquiries to the communications firms. So that was decided months ago. And so what that meant was that then the communication firms were going to field press inquiries that we received or that were forwarded to them by the DOJ, and then reached out to the task force members about press inquiries and press opportunities, along with, talking about uniform talking points that we could all access as task force members in the event that we are individually reached out to by press. That hasn't happened yet. In fact, I'm still having to, wait for the DOJ to give me the emails that we received from the general reparations email, and then I have to look through each one to see which one is a press inquiry. So in fact, if I didn't do that, let's say for the January hearing, I would have missed a Rolling Stone interview about our expert witness, Professor Kevin Green, right? If the communications firms were doing their job, they would have informed us, okay, there's a press inquiry from the Rolling Stone, who wants to be quoted or something like that. That's what we voted on for them to do, and they haven't done that yet. And I also reached out to them directly, and they sent me a short-term communication strategy that they were going to do for this upcoming March meeting, but they didn't do any of it. The only thing they did was the urgent advisory meeting that was scheduled to be an hour, but it was just 15 minutes, and they gave out bad information. Someone asked for a website, and they gave an email, and it was the wrong email at that. And then I emailed them before the March hearing, and I asked them, do promotional flyers, are those included in your deliverables? I didn't get a response from them. They did ask if I wanted to meet in April 4th, but I asked them a particular question about this March hearing, and they didn't respond to that email. So, I mean, am I not justified to share these concerns to the public? This is a public notice meeting. Like, I'm not understanding why I'm being criticized for literally just doing my job.
It's not about, this is not a public process. It is about, if you have concerns and the intent is to make sure that things are on course, then there would have been other ways you could have expressed your concerns so that accurate information could be gathered, problems could be laid out, and people brought to the table to share how they're going to make corrections, if corrections are necessary. And that's
Madam
all
Chair,
I have to say.
I'll call for the agenda, and then we move on to the next item.
Can I make a
I
comment too,
second if it's needed.
Camila?
I have a motion.
Chair Moore. So just putting aside the shortcomings that we talked about, in order to have the meeting in April, very as productive as possible, I think it would be a good idea to have a direct conversation with the comms team and the UCLA Bunch Center. And they can look at the recording of this, but express what you've articulated, which, if true, are concerning. I mean, I think those are valid points. Everybody has raised valid points. But I'd like them to walk into that meeting with answers or, some sort of explanation. And if the explanation is not good enough, of course, the chips will fall where they will. But I think there needs to be some communication before the 13th and the 14th so that when we have that meeting, we have a really productive discussion, and then the task force can properly assess whether they can do this job or not. So, is that something that we can ask the chair to do? Or, I don't want to burden you, but I think they need to hear your complaints directly, and the same with the Bunch Center.
Sure. I guess I'm just always thinking ahead in contingency planning. What if we decide that their answers are insufficient? What do we do?
You might have a good sense for after you talk with them. But they're on the agenda so that we know, in advance they're going to be speaking, but they should be addressing each of the concerns that you raised at the meeting, at today's meeting. I would hope that they would come back, and if they haven't, done this stuff already, that they have an explanation as to why, it didn't happen. And then the task force can have enough information to make a decision.
Chair Moore, we can also help facilitate a meeting, just like we do in other contexts. If perhaps a meeting with you and Dr. Grills and the communications firms, we can try to schedule a meeting before the next task force meeting, so that everyone can be prepared to address, some of these concerns and bring back the full scope of information to the task force, so that the firm would have answers to provide to everyone to be able to inform the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
And I also just, if I could just quickly say, I also just think that that's a good protocol for the future, to, if we are encountering shortfalls, to have the DOJ facilitate a meeting with the Bunch Center and the communications firms before we have a public meeting, so that we can see that the benchmarks are being met and make decisions that are informed.
But Attorney Brown, you stated in an email, and I think you restated this as well, the DOJ doesn't necessarily manage the relationship between you don't manage the contract per se. And so you said that Grills is a liaison, correct?
That's correct. And this would not be an attempt to insert ourselves in the management of the contract, rather to facilitate the communication between the task force and those vendors. So we would still leave all of the decision making, all of the expression of the concerns to be channeled between you, Member Grills, and the outside groups. We would just assist with the facilitation of that communication.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the motion. Honestly, I don't necessarily think I need to meet with the firms. They just need to come as agendized to the April meeting and be prepared to answer the questions and the concerns that I raised and other task force members raised at the hearing.
But
So
that's the
what
point.
needs-
But that's the point. I mean, they need to know firsthand what the complaints are. And again, I don't want to burden you, Chair
in the
Moore, with this, but
contract.
somebody has to talk to them. And so when they walk into the April 13th meeting, then we can actually make decisions. We can evaluate them. But
Would you like to meet with them?
I'd be happy to get involved in this. Let me just say a couple things. In April 4, we have to get back to comments on the report. The other thing is April 4, Lisa Holder and I will get the first draft of the subpoena that we have to review. And so we're very much time crunched, but you are too. So if it's something that you would want to delegate out, I don't mind doing it, or perhaps another task force member might
I'm
step
happy to.
Madam Chair.
I'm happy to.
Okay, I see
joined,
Member Montgomery. Okay,
I'll
Vice Chair
meet
Brown
with-
and Member Montgomery. And I'll just say that before they meet, I reached out to the Bunch Center to ask for the subcontract between the Bunch Center and the two communication firms, because the only copy of a contract I have is a contract between the Bunch Center and the DOJ. But then the Bunch Center is the one who contracted out with the two communications firms. I asked for that subcontract. I have not received it yet. So for Vice Chair Brown and Member Montgomery's step, I think in order to best prepare for the meeting, not only should you have access to the contract between the DOJ and the Bunch Center, but also get access to the subcontract between the Bunch Center and the two communications firms.
That's reasonable.
Okay, so, okay, so there's a motion on the floor to adopt the draft agenda as presented. It's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on the matter? Hearing no discussion, I will call Parliamentarian Johnson so that a roll call vote may be established.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Voting on the motion, Chair Moore.
Aye.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Yes.
Vice Chair Brown votes yes. Member Bradford.
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills.
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder.
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer.
Yes.
Member Jones, excuse me, Jones Sawyer votes yes.
Yes.
Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Yes.
Member Tamaki votes yes. Member Montgomery Steppe.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 9 members voting. There were 9 ayes and no nays.
Thank you. There were 9 members voting, 9 ayes and no nays. The ayes have it, so the motion carries. We will adopt the agenda for April 13th and 14th as presented. Thank you. And then also Vice Chair Brown and Member Montgomery Steppe have offered to meet with the communication firms. So
Chairman,
the last item.
I just wanted to be real quick. I'm happy to talk to Member Grills too, and just, or instead of, or I don't want to remove that piece out of it, right? So I'll just be available to Member Grills.
Thank you so much. Yes, Member Rose is the liaison for this, so she would be the pertinent person to stay connected with on this. So the next thing is unfinished business. So at this time, can the DOJ present the 2 slides they prepared on the report? So what the DOJ prepared 2 slides based on some recommendations that I had for the first report. So, like every other task force member, we each gave comments on, the drafts of the report. And so in feedback from the DOJ on my particular comments, they stated that a couple of my comments could change the framing necessarily of the report. And so they decided to create 2 slides to present the task force so that I can share those those proposed additions, get your commentary on it, and potentially entertain a motion to adopt those 2 additions to the report. Does the DOJ have that on file, or should I try to go through my email and find it?
We're loading it now.
It'll be just one moment.
No. That's not it. I can't remember if you all sent it to me. I know that you all, Damon, you sent me an outline of what the slides would be, but I'm not sure if I actually got the slides. I'm happy to share my screen and share the email you sent, but there's a confidentiality notice to it.
Yeah, we're having some technical difficulties on the back end we're trying to resolve, but it should be up momentarily. This is the slide, Chair Moore.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the first edit that I proposed, or I'm proposing, is that in the report that we change references from Black American to African American. And that's mainly because Black American isn't in the statute, AB 3121, African American is. And so in order for the report to be most aligned with the statute, I am proposing that we change Black American to African American, noting that in our report, right, African American isn't a race, because it's not. We're Black, right? But African American is not a race. It's a distinct group or historical signifier for a distinct lineage used since the 1700s by African Americans, which could also be interchangeably used with American freedmen. And I think that also is in alignment not only with the statute and its references to African Americans, but it's also in alignment with the community of eligibility vote that we made yesterday. And then also, in light of the vote that we made yesterday in terms of a lineage standard versus a race standard, I'm also proposing that we change references from race and racism to casteism or castis. And that's in part because, remember, Isabel Wilkerson, who provided expert testimony to us in September of 2021, in her Pulitzer Prize winning book, she noted that she tried her hardest to eliminate references of race because she realized that that term was insufficient. Race or racism was insufficient to describe the totality of experiences of the African American experience in this country. Right? She showed how race is really a proxy for the American caste system, which is built on the descendants of enslaved people in this country. And so I think to make our report even more groundbreaking than it already will be, I'm also proposing that change as well. So at this time, I'd like to hear your feedback on it, but also in order to structure the discussion, entertain a motion related to these two proposed edits. Member Scott Lewis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I agree with the first change. Adopting Isabel Wilkinson's framework, I'm less comfortable with, because there's a need to actually make a broader, I think, systemic argument around the function of caste, and I think I don't know if it's within the scope of the task force to be making that kind of sociological determination. And I don't mean to get terribly academic about it, but there are a lot of issues actually with the book. I mean, and if we had time, I would go into them. But I wouldn't feel comfortable endorsing that second change without having adequate discussion where I could actually lay out my concerns with that framing. I think also the kind of requirement of the document to help communicate to the public, there would be this added requirement that we engage in a proper analysis of the word caste as a analytical framework. In other words, the report would also have to make the argument for this change from race to caste, and that would also require further time and further consideration.
Yeah, I realized that as I was reading through the report. You're totally right about that.
We would need a chapter on why we should use caste instead of race. That would be an absolute requirement at minimum. And I don't know if that's, I mean, if you want to make that case to do so, that's different. But I just, just a simple substitution, I think at this point would be a bit problematic.
Yeah, thank you for raising that concern. Any other members have any comments? Member Grills, Member John Sawyer, then Member Holder.
So first of all, your distinction here that African American is not a race, it's a distinct group or historical signifier, doesn't align with what the U.S. Census Bureau has indicated. And the U.S. Census Bureau says Black or African American, a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. So I'm not understanding this distinction that you're making. And then as far as the caste issue, there's been some debate about Wilkerson's use of caste, and I think it just introduces, in alignment with what Member Lewis said, I agree with him. And to add to that, I think it adds another layer of complexity and potential confusion in beginning to change labels on something that is already going to be presenting people with a lot of cognitive dissonance, trying to, not just Black folk, but people in general are going to have to digest what we're coming up with. And to introduce a whole lot of new things, I think is just going to add confusion and potentially dilute what we're going to be trying to convey to folks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Member John Sawyer. We'll go to Member Joe Sawyer. I recognize Member John Sawyer, Member Holder, and then I'll get to you, Vice Chair Brown.
I'm on this, probably on the same lines. We're probably the only group of people that we go from Negro to colored to Black. We change our nomenclature all the time, and then sometimes it can be a little confusing. And that we, right now I don't even see the difference between Black Americans and the African Americans. And look, I'm one that changed the California, when I was chair of the California Black Caucus, I changed it to the California African American Caucus because I was young. I just thought it was the coolest thing to do. It didn't have anything behind it other than that was the new moving cool. Call yourself that, and it had no empirical or nothing to back it up. On the caste, I do believe it would cause a lot of confusion. And I also worry that white people then would take that to mean caste doesn't mean that we're not racist. And it's not about race when they came and terrorized us. And it was about a caste system. And then we'd have to, I think other members have said, we'd have to explain caste is the same or worse or whatever. And it would just make it so confusing as far as trying to make our point about how people looked at us and our skin, and that's what drove them to treat us as less than human. And so, I'm very uncomfortable with caste, and I guess you got to see where Black Americans in the context, and I haven't really read through it, in the context of what we've written, to see, would this change make any substantive difference?
Thank you. Member Holder?
I'm uncomfortable with the changes. Definitely with the second. I don't think I need to belabor the point. Point was well made. But regarding the first, it says we need to add a discussion that, African American is not a race. Are you saying that we need to add a discussion to the report about that issue?
I think it was meant to say like a footnote, like a footnote like a footnote.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. I think that is actually, that's a major discussion, that many scholars would weigh in on differently. And so I don't think we can relegate it to a footnote, change, these labels that have been part of, the parlance for so long, just relegating it to a footnote. I think it takes a much more sophisticated and lengthy analysis. Also, most of the scholars who came in and testified were using the term Black American and African American to mean race. And we have to make sure that this report captures what our scholars said and correlates to their linguistics. So I wouldn't just, haphazardly change that language.
Thank you. I'll go to Vice Chair Brown.
Madam Chair, members of the task force, you must speak the language of the 8th grade scholar. I think we should leave that alone.
Great. Yeah, I guess it also, just to add, in my calculus for those 2 proposed edits, I was also thinking ahead and kind of seeing what these kind of conservative groups do when it comes to these types of legislation. They'll look at our hearings, they'll look at our report, and if something is overtly race-based, and this is what they've done in Evanston, they're going to immediately take that and attack it. And so I was just thinking ahead about some crafty ways to prevent that from happening. So that's really kind of the underlying motive for why I was proposing these changes. But I completely understand the concerns raised by the members who've discussed thus far. What we can do, since this is, someone can entertain a motion where, reject both, or we can table the discussion for April, or entertain a motion to accept one over the other.
I'd say let's table the discussion.
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded.
Okay.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Table the discussion. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Yes. Chair Moore?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Yes.
Vice Chair Brown, did you say yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Bradford?
Aye.
Member Grills?
Aye.
Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
Madam Chair, 9 members were voting. There were 9 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 9 ayes and 0 nays, and the motion passes as the ayes have it. And so this discussion on these 2 proposed edits to the report will be tabled until our next meeting at April 13th and April 14th. So now we will adjourn. Thank you all, members of the public, press. Oh, sorry, am I missing something? Senator Bradford?
Mention something before we adjourn,
Yes,
Madam
sir.
Chair.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very briefly, this morning during public communications or comments, there were a lot of accusations made, both positive and negative, toward members of this task force, and even to allude to sabotage. And I think to make the fact that the difference of opinion is sabotaging what we're trying to do is divisive, counterproductive. A wise man once said to me, if everybody's thinking alike, then nobody's thinking. So the diversity in opinion is great. And I want my colleagues to continue to feel free to express their opinions, and whether they differ from mine, I'm fine with that. But for someone to say that if you have a different opinion, you're sabotaging what we're trying to do, I just think that's unnecessary. And groupthink is not why we're here. We have 9 individuals with 9 individuals who have brilliant minds. And so we're going to agree probably 90% of the time, but those few times where we don't get unanimous vote, that's fine. But don't go out and attack any member of this task force simply because they weren't in unison and lockstep on what people believe. So I just wanted to go on record on that. I just think that was an unnecessary comment toward any of the members here if you disagree here. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Bradford, and I am in agreement as chair of the task force. I'm sure if Vice Chair wants to speak on this, he can as well. But, despite there being a difference of an opinion on particularly the community of eligibility, I trust and have full faith in the 9 members of this task force to carry on as a unit to do what we were fulfilled to do. So I actually agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think anyone is trying to intentionally sabotage the process. So thank you for that.
Chair Moore, I'm sorry, before we adjourn, can I just address a couple of things? One, as I mentioned earlier about the public comment, we've kind of conferred informally internally, and we don't think that it would be a problem to continue take public comments telephonically at the in-person meeting, as well as witness testimony telephonically. Again, I'm not sure of the electronic means of us being able to do anything via video, but certainly we are exploring the options that may be available to us and how we can facilitate that, and we will institute whatever we can at the April in-person meeting. The second point that I wanted to just remind you, I had raised the issue of witness selection yesterday, looking for some kind of guidance from the task force as we just have a very short turnaround window of time to confirm witnesses before the April meeting. If anyone has any ideas of what they would like to see in terms of how we should be confirming witnesses, or to clarify or provide some insight as to the full length of authority that the chair and the vice chair have to make decisions with respect to the number and the selection of witnesses, that would be helpful as we again kind of do this in a truncated period of time over the next couple of weeks. And I'm sorry to delay the meeting. I know everybody's ready to go home, but this is something that's important that we really want to try to nail down as we enter into this next planning phase.
I guess I was going to say, Chair Moore, one of the issues was task force members not knowing how many other witnesses other task force members are proposing. And then when you make offers to them, you have more people than the time permits. And basically, how do we make a decision in terms of what the agenda is going to look like? Otherwise, we run into a situation we had earlier where perhaps there's too many witnesses. So is that what you're raising?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to get some clarity on that. I do think we do need to have a process
Okay.
because I have no idea, for instance, if I propose someone, whether other people are proposing others, and maybe I'm willing to withdraw my witness suggestion. I'd like to get some coordination.
Member
Well,
Grills, you're recognized.
yeah, and I just also wanted to add that I think in that conversation we should look at the issue of how we are engaging with the people that we are recommending. I know when I made suggestions or recommendations for witnesses, I never confirm them. I tell them I'm submitting their name, but that I don't have the power to confirm their participation. So that I think could alleviate some of the problem by not indicating to anyone that they are definitely a witness, but that we are making recommendations. And there's another process that has to happen to determine the final witnesses.
Okay, I just want to say that. Go ahead, Member Scott Lewis. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Chairman.
Well, I was just going to say, and this is particularly aimed at the DOJ. Again, when those 8 people were on the agenda, 2 of which Vice Chair Brown and I aimed to remove from the agenda, it was communicated to the DOJ that the chair and the vice chair don't have the power to remove witnesses from a draft agenda after witnesses have been quote unquote confirmed. But Member Gross just said that, and rightfully so, when she reaches out to people, she says this is not necessarily a confirmation, right? And so a miscommunication, I think, on the DOJ's part that really needs to be addressed. And it's a continuation or reiteration of a conversation that I thought we had resolved months ago on this very issue. So there's more I could say, but I'll turn it to Member Jovan Scott Lewis and any other folks so we can wrap up.
Sure. Thank you. I'll just say that when I've recommended people to the DOJ, I've never reached out to the witnesses themselves. The recommendations or the requests come directly from the DOJ. I'm not involved with the process. So there is no expectation. They don't even know I'm involved. So, I mean, that's been my approach. But, Damon, I'm just wondering, we have time allotments. Well, I think in principle, like with this meeting, we, you, Chair Moore and myself, we talked, and we laid out a structure. And so I think, the agreement was that, well, and Member Holder mentioned this in our session yesterday, right? We agreed to a very specific, time allotment for that particular activity. So, I understand that your question is what to do when the number of recommended witnesses exceeds the allotted time. Can we not just, do something that's relatively straightforward? Let's try to accommodate at least one request per task force member. Typically, we are only asking, we're asking for an hour to 2 hours tops, for each witness panel. So maybe we can just simply adopt a policy or a practice. I don't want to say the word policy around everybody here. Burdensome. But, well, each task force member, if they made a recommendation, they get a witness added to the list, and we can keep going around and adding people to the time fills. I just don't know why it has to be terribly complicated. And I know that there's protocol and what have you, but it doesn't have to be this complicated, I don't think. Everybody can recommend somebody, and then we can go back, and that's it.
And just to add, what I will say is that I do understand where things can get very thorny if the DOJ says this is the deadline, and then we start adding people after the deadline. I do think if the DOJ gives us a reasonable deadline, we should stick with it. And if we miss the deadline, then we miss the deadline.
Absolutely.
And Member Lewis, the issue still exists, even if the task force each person submitted one name. That's still 9 individuals, potentially for a 1-hour time slot. And so there still needs to be some direction. And I think to the point that Chair Moore made, the issue wasn't necessarily the confirmation of witnesses. Didn't have that wasn't sort of the triggering issue for us. It was just whether or not the chair and the vice chair have the authority to call balls and strikes, to say, we have this list of people, we will then determine who makes it to the list. And we know that that is in our authority to do. We weren't clear that that was even the authority that had been delegated to the chair, to the vice chair to do. So that's the part of it, I think, that we need direction on from the task force. Do you want to delegate that authority to the chair and the vice chair, or to some other individuals to make those calls when we do have a disproportionate number of witnesses for the time allotted for any kind of panel?
Right.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair,
You're recognized.
should not the guiding principle be balance and fairness? We ought to hear persons with opposing positions, but this should not be seen as being any competitive effort for individual members to present a person. And someone has to make the decision about balance.
The only thing that I will say, if I could just quickly jump in, the only thing I will say is that I think if we're in a peculiar or unique situation where the task force specifically says, we need time to have a discussion, we do not want more than 1 hour's worth of witnesses, that is a directive from the collective task force that must be adhered to.
That's right. And so the DOJ seemed to be using the time, right? And so that's why, there was a question as to how would you use the powers that you have as a DOJ. Rather than cutting witnesses, you decided to use your power to actually extend the time, which cut into our abilities to do our job in the discussion yesterday, right? And so it seemed as if one way or another, there was still this kind of overreach. So, member Holder is right. If we agree to the hour, then that's that. And if if the DOJ gets to the point where you have more witnesses than you have time, then send an email. You know what I mean? And say, okay, you suggested 4 witnesses. Which of the 2 are you willing to let go of? Because we have time constraints. I mean, that's what I meant when I mentioned that it wasn't really a complicated process. But if there is a question that you're asking them about the powers, then I'm very happy to have the chair and vice chair have those powers to give them the ability to use their discretion to help to narrow the witness list if it is a question of time constraint, and if at the very least each task force member has been given an opportunity, right, to have their views represented by a possible witness.
So I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay.
As the chair and vice chair have shown that they may not be impartial. And what DOJ is saying is that they have a problem right now where, let's say yesterday, where the chair took up an inordinate amount of time in our package to present stuff. And we had a schedule. DOJ didn't knock that schedule off. It was the chair. DOJ is not responsible for keeping us on track on our time. It's the chair. So what DOJ is asking, should this, when we set the agenda like we're doing now, should it be all of us? But now we may have to go deeper about setting who's going to speak. Because it's my understanding it's not always fair about making it fair and impartial. And if it is, we don't know, the rest of the task force members, whether or not it's fair and impartial. And so I think that's what's troubling DOJ, and they're between a rock and a hard place. And we've kind of put them there, and they're saying it's not our responsibility. This body, this group needs to may have to make or help the chair and vice chair make those decisions. And it may result in being a little more communicative with the DOJ part, getting the list of people who are there so we can look at it, see it, set it, and then move on and feel comfortable with whoever's speaking. That is, as Dr. Brown said, Reverend Brown said, that is balanced from both sides.
2 points. One, I was not the reason why time was knocked off. Time was knocked off because we experienced technical difficulties since 8:30 a.m. So that's the reason why time was knocked off yesterday. And then second, in terms of the perceived notions of the chair and the vice chair being impartial, again, let's go back to the agenda for the Community of Eligibility panel. There were 8 witnesses recommended. 6 of them were genealogists, 4 of them recommended by me, 1 recommended by Grills, and 1 recommended by Holder. Vice Chair Brown and I had no problems with those genealogists listed from myself, from Holder, or from Grills. The issue came in when there were 2 additional witnesses on that agenda who were affiliates, organizational affiliates of member Grills. So then Vice Chair and myself, as ethical, hold on, please. As ethical leaders, right? We looked at the agenda and we saw, well, the genealogists, whether they're pro-lineage or not, they have a place in the discussion, but it didn't seem fair or partial for these 2 NARC affiliates to, present their opinions without also having some balance to balance in that discussion. And so that's why we added 2 other people so that there could be balance, so that it didn't appear to be some partiality to the public when they saw that list and they saw, okay, well, it seems like the task force has already kind of decided where they want to go. And so we added additional witnesses so that there could be balance and parity. So I didn't prove your point. I actually disproved it.
You just said you made the decision.
But can I jump in real quick? First of all, I think that there is a certain responsibility that the chair and the vice chair have for this. This was a special situation with the Community of Eligibility. It's the most controversial decision that we will make. We are restricted by all of these rules. We are also online. So all of that contributes to the situation that we had yesterday. What would help is, because we do have different stories being told and nothing is in writing. So I would like from the DOJ, when you provide your updates, if this is something that you're going to ask, that you give us a chronological order of what happened and what posed the issue that's coming before, so that we can have that to make a decision. Just like I said months ago when this came up about authority of the chair and vice chair, at the end of the day, that was one of the first votes we took. It was also a very close vote. It was not easy for us to make that vote, but we made it. And the concern that I have is that we will, as we have from the very beginning, get bogged down in all of this procedure and all of this bickering, and we don't get to the substance. That's the issue that I have. And there has to be some balance of leadership. And we have the statute gives us only a certain amount of meetings. We have all of these things to do. And if we go back and forth about every item on an agenda, which the chair and vice chair and every committee, I won't say every, but I know I'm chair of public safety and I do choose that agenda. That's what I do. And so my concern is, now if Member Jones Sawyer has something, direction to put on the floor, then I'm happy to hear that. But my concern is that we will get bogged up in procedure and we will continue to be behind in the decisions that we actually need to make. So I don't support having a micromanaging task force over a chair and vice chair. If we have issues, we need to address those globally. But going in and blaming it on an agenda when it's really, we have a difference of opinion, there is a split, that's a global issue that hopefully when we get together in person and we, do more than what we're doing now, and see and be in each other's physical presence, it'll be different. But I just don't, I'm not for that. I don't want that to be an additional thing that this task force takes on with all that we have to take on.
Vice Chair
Madam
Brown?
Chair, I have a motion that we adjourn the meeting. I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
You need a second.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded that we'll adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion on the matter?
Yeah, I don't think Damon has an answer.
I don't. I'm sorry. I don't have any direction from that discussion. I certainly acknowledge the various opinions that were expressed, but feel that we're still in the same position.
Damon, can I recommend that if you come upon this issue, that you email us individually and just say, hey, here's the situation. What are your views? And then you collect those views of the 9 of us, and then you make the decision. But my point earlier is that you are making decisions already, right? And that was what I think Lisa's point was, is that you're making decisions, and that's fine. The problem is that you want to make more and better informed decisions. So just email us and say, we got an hour, we have 25 people. What are your suggestions? How would you rank these 25 people? And then you take a view.
I'm not sure that I'm able to do that under Bagley-Keene, but because essentially I'm building consensus by the task force members without I'm sort of the intermediary in that sense. So I can't convey what other task force members' thoughts are to the other task force members without violating Bagley-Keene.
Which is my concern.
You don't convey it. I don't think you need to convey it to us. I think that you need to be informed by our opinion, and then you make the decision. So if you know that the task force as a collective gave a directive that we only want an hour worth of testimony, then you just, because you're not conveying that to us.
So Damon, early in this process,
Let's
sorry.
So we'll get to member Scott Lewis and then member Montgomery Steppe.
So early in the process, there was a spreadsheet where we were asked to put the names of witnesses, right? And so we could see the witnesses that were being recommended, not necessarily by other people who were recommending these witnesses, but we could see the names of other people. And so unless something has changed in the process or the protocols, I don't see a reason why we can't see a list of names of people. And then you can ask us, right? Who do we individually want to cut if you need to make a cut? And that doesn't mean we know collectively who's being cut. But I do remember there was a spreadsheet in the very beginning and we were asked to give witness names, and on the spreadsheet were names that other people had introduced. I don't know who introduced them. Could have been DOJ.
Member Montgomery Steppe.
Question. I call for the question.
Real quick, let me just say that when us looking at a witness list is different from Damon contacting each of us and asking us what we think, and then taking that yay or nay consensus or whatever it is, and then turning that into an action. That and then on top of that, I don't want, if I'm taking the authority away from the chair and vice chair and giving it to the DOJ, I don't want to do that. So it's not up to the DOJ to make the decision. So I think there's a distinction there. I mean, you can interpret it differently, but that's what I see.
And I absolutely agree with you. But it seems like it's 6:33 and people, don't want to make a decision. And
I
so
know.
my only point, and me as well, right? My point was that the DOJ actually made, right, a decision by extending the time.
That's I'm sorry, I have to back up.
Is that not right?
Member Lewis, that is not correct. No, we did
Okay,
not
well, I
extend the time.
apologize. I apologize. Okay. So the time was extended. I don't know how it happened, right? I mean, maybe this is part of the problem. But I know as Lisa Holder, mentioned, we agreed to an hour, and then it became more than that. So the point is, however, the time was extended is clearly the site where the powers to affect the agenda rest. So whomever was involved in extending the time of the witness panel, I would argue has the same power to determine the scope of the witnesses if they exceed the allotted time that the task force has agreed to. Because that power is being exercised one way or the other. Because we didn't agree to a 2-hour plus witness panel yesterday. And that was my point, Monica, right? It's like, it's being done.
Right.
It's being done, so the power somehow exists in some legible form and is being executed. So wherever that is, if it's a chair, the vice chair, and the DOJ who decided to extend that part of our agenda yesterday, then that's who I think, right, has the abilities and the powers to actually determine that a witness list needs to be shortened to comport with the time that the task force asked for.
And I'll just say the time was extended even further, but in the initial draft agenda that we received from the DOJ, it included 8 witnesses. That would have been more than an hour of testimony anyway. And so then, recognizing that there were 8 witnesses, it would have been more than an hour. Vice Chair Brown and myself said we would exercise our authority to remove 2 people from the agenda. We would still leave on the 6 genealogists, 2 of which were recommended by Grills and Holder, so you cannot argue that there was any impartiality, right? Because all witness recommendations from all task force members were respected. We just wanted to remove those 2 people to make it 6 people to fit within an hour. The DOJ said we didn't have the authority to do that. And so then we said, okay, well, we'll add 2 more people to the agenda to achieve parity and impartiality. So it doesn't look like the task force is already decided on the community of eligibility by virtue of who's listed as witnesses. So this is so ironic that we're having this conversation. And then I just want to remind us that we had this conversation a few months ago because there was some confusion around, does the DOJ have the authority to confirm if that witnesses or not? Because remember, there was Professor Roy Brooks, who was not recommended by any task force member. It was recommended by a consultant by virtue of the DOJ hiring them. And then that professor gave testimony talking about reparations and fried chicken and a lot of insensitive things. So then we had to have a conversation. Who has the authority to vet and select witnesses? And I thought we resolved that by saying the chair and the vice chair has that authority. Apparently the DOJ said that wasn't necessarily resolved. I'm pulling up the meeting minutes from the past hearings to see if that was transcribed or not. But nevertheless, we're back here. So
Madam Chair, I call for my motion to be acted on to adjourn.
Don had his hand up.
Okay, Member Tamaki, and then we'll recognize Vice Chairman.
Real quick, this is something that can be revisited again, but at least for the time being, maybe we keep the authority in the chair and the vice chair. But, I think the task force is expressing a couple things. One, what Pastor Brown said about difference of opinion, diversity, balance within the fixed time. And the other principle is once the task force approves of the agenda and the hour, that's pretty sacrosanct. The authority can't be to expand it, to put in more witnesses or to do other things with it. That's the allotted time that the task force approved. But maybe at least for the time being, just to move this along, and we could revisit it at another meeting if that doesn't work out. But to get us beyond this point, I'd feel comfortable with that approach.
Would you like to entertain a motion, Member Tamaki?
Yeah, I would move that the task force for the foreseeable future until it's revisited vests the authority to determine the number of witnesses to fit into the agenda, but subject to a number of parameters. One is with an eye toward balance, with an eye toward diverse views, with an eye toward fitting it into the time frame, and then, of course, subject to compliance. The guardrails would be the agenda that has been approved by the task force. And then to the extent that task force wants to revisit it, of course, it goes without saying that it can't be at any time.
Point of order, did the Reverend have a motion on the floor?
The
About
motion
adjourning?
was that we would adjourn.
And I seconded it. What happened to that?
Okay, so we'll carry the motion.
Because we have a tendency to do, when I do a point of order, we have a tendency to then go ahead and have a motion, which then would be out of order. So I'm just saying, if we're going to follow
Parliamentarian Johnson, we can carry the motion to adjourn the meeting. Parliamentarian Johnson, you may proceed. Parliamentarian Johnson.
This is Aisha. I can go ahead and call the roll. Madam Chair, Chair Moore, this is to adjourn?
Yes.
This is to adjourn, correct?
Yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
Member Bradford?
I think he's gone.
Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer?
Aye.
Member Grills?
Aye.
Member Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Lewis?
Aye.
Madam Chair, there were 8 ayes voting yes and 1 not present. And so the motion carries to adjourn.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Martin Walton. There are 9 ayes. 8 ayes.
8 ayes.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you in April.
Bye-bye.
Aye.
Bye.